Tracy, I just want to say, again, how sorry I am. I know we're throwing another baby shower for you in Connecticut soon, but I really wish I could have made it to Georgia for this one. I had already missed my oldest daughter's first baby shower because I had to attend a mandatory quarterly meeting at the home office of the insurance company my agency represents in Connecticut. My dad started the firm almost 40 years ago, and in a couple of years, when he officially retires, I'll be the one taking over. Mom, for the 1000th time, don't stress about it, Tracy reassured me. The shower you're hosting in 2 weeks will be here before we know it. Plus, I can't wait to get back to Connecticut and see all my old friends. She was calling me on Zoom from her home just outside Atlanta. My husband, Chris, had joined the call from our place in Farmington, Connecticut, while I was dialing in from my Marriott hotel room in Charlotte, North Carolina. We can't wait for you to get home, I said. So, Tracy, how are the meetings going? Chris jumped in. Yeah, Jilly, how's everything on your end? As usual, there's a lot of great material, I told them. I've picked up a few key takeaways to implement over the next quarter. But honestly, I don't understand why American Insurance insists on doing these meetings in person. We could just as easily hold them online. The cost savings alone would be huge for each agency. Tracy didn't hesitate. Big companies like that are just stuck in their ways. Chris chimed in. Well, American Insurance has to justify that $15 million training and meeting center they built right before COVID. I nodded, then changed the subject. So, what are the boys up to this weekend? And why aren't they on our weekly family call? They're up at the cabin in Vermont, Chris said. I talked to them last night. They've got a small group of friends with them and we're planning to hike up Mount Mansfield today. Being in Vermont doesn't get them off the hook for our weekly calls, I pointed out. We installed internet at the cabin over 10 years ago. This is the 3rd week in a row they've skipped out on family time. If you're not going to say something, I will. Chris didn't seem too concerned. Be my guest, he said, his tone laced with sarcasm. Before I could respond, Lauren jumped in. So, do you have anything fun planned for tonight? Not a thing, I admitted. I ordered room service right before we got on the call. It should be here any minute. After that, I'm going straight to bed. 4 days of meetings have completely drained me. Sweetheart, we wrap up at 11 tomorrow morning. If my flight's on time, I'll land in Hartford at 3:40 and should be home before 5. Chris barely reacted. Your itinerary's on the fridge. I know when you'll be home. That made me pause. 2 sarcastic comments in a row. I let it go, though. Lauren was still on the call, and this wasn't the time. But I made a mental note to bring it up with Chris once I got home. All right, I need to go. My dinner's about to arrive. Love you both. Lauren, we'll talk during the week, and I'll see you at the airport in 2 weeks. Chris, I'll see you tomorrow. See you soon, Lauren said. Good night, Chris added. Then their faces disappeared from my laptop screen. I sat there for a moment, feeling more upset than I wanted to admit. Every other call had ended with at least one "I love you." But not tonight. Maybe, I told myself, they're just as exhausted as I am. I shut my laptop, stood up, and pulled my nightshirt over my head, tossing it onto the bed. Then I headed into the bathroom. I spent a few minutes putting on just a touch of makeup. At 49, with shoulder-length blonde hair and blue eyes, most people would say I'm an attractive woman. Chris always calls me a 10, but after 27 years of marriage, he kind of has to, doesn't he? Back when we met at the University of Connecticut, me in my senior year, him in his 3rd year of law school, I might have been a solid 9. But time has a way of creeping up, and these days, I'd say I'm more of an 8. A cougar, even. Standing naked in front of the full-length mirror, I pulled the band from my hair, letting it cascade over my shoulders. Running my fingers through it, I gave my head a shake. Perfect. Tonight, I was going with a little black dress, one that hugged my curves just right. The hem fell about 3 inches above my knees, perfectly accentuating my toned legs, thanks to all those hours at the gym. My date preferred a natural look, but let's be real, gravity wasn't exactly on my side anymore. The girls needed a little help. That sheer black Victoria's Secret number I bought just for tonight? Definitely the right call. I couldn't help but smile a few minutes later as I strode into the hotel's dining room, catching the subtle turn of heads in my direction. Across the room, I spotted Mark, sitting by a window with a view of downtown Charlotte from the 11th floor. As I made my way through the tables, his grin grew wider. Mark Gleason was the son of the insurance agency owner handling the Cincinnati, Ohio market. We first met 9 years ago at this same quarterly corporate meeting and hit it off as friends. 2 years later, we took things further, and from that point on, we became, well, let's just call it what it is, roommates and lovers every time these meetings rolled around. Like me, Mark was married. He had 5 kids, all still in their preteen years. And just like I was preparing to take over my father's agency, he was next in line for his. Mark wasn't taller than Chris, or more handsome, or even smarter. But that never really mattered. Mark wasn't taller than my husband, or more handsome, or even smarter. But he was 12 years younger, and he could bounce back a lot faster. After his youngest was born, he had a vasectomy, which meant we never had to worry about protection. As I reached the table, Mark stood, greeted me with a quick kiss on the cheek, and pulled out my chair before I sat down. "Everything okay at home?" he asked. I sighed. I'm a little annoyed the boys skipped our call again, and Chris was a bit snippy, but other than that, everything's fine. Tracy's baby shower went well, and she'll be coming home for the Harrington family and friends shower in 2 weeks. Mark nodded. He had stepped out earlier to give me privacy, calling his own family from a quiet spot in the lobby. "The kids are good, excited that I'll be home tomorrow," he said. Leanne was in a mood, though. But honestly, I think she's just exhausted from dealing with them all week. He motioned toward the glass of red wine in front of me, lifted his own, and flashed a playful grin. "To another great conference," he said. I smiled as we clinked our glasses together. And then, before I could take a sip, a third chair appeared at our table, right next to mine. I looked up, and my stomach dropped. For a moment, my mind scrambled for words, but they just wouldn't come. The person sitting down across from me? My very pregnant daughter. "Hi, cheating woman," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "How was your room service dinner?" "Tracy." I blinked, trying to process what was happening. "Tracy." My voice came out shaky. "What the hell are you doing here?" She leaned back in her chair, her smile sharp, condescending. "I didn't believe Dad when he told us you were a lying, cheating woman," she said smoothly. "So, I had to come see for myself." My heart pounded so hard I could hear it in my ears. "Tracy, sweetheart, it's not what you think," I said, forcing myself to stay calm, to steady my breath. She folded her arms and smirked. "Oh, really? Let's test that," she said. "Let's see if I'm wrong. Because here's what I think." She paused, then stared straight into my eyes. "I think you did nothing but lie during our entire 38-minute family call. You're having an affair with this loser," she said, nodding toward Mark. "At every single one of these quarterly conferences." Her voice was steady, but every word hit like a punch to the gut. "I think you've completely broken Dad. I think you've pushed your family away. I think Grandma and Grandpa would be ashamed to even call you their daughter. And I think any chance you had of taking over the firm from Grandpa." She scoffed. Yeah, that just went straight down the drain. My head was spinning, my thoughts scrambling for any kind of response, but before I could say a word, Mark shot up from his chair. "This is a family matter," he said quickly. "I'm gonna excuse myself so you can handle this in private. I thought things had already hit rock bottom. I was wrong." Tracy flashed a sweet, almost innocent smile. "You know, I'd think a genius like you would want to sit down, shut up, and figure out just how bad of a storm you're walking into when you get home to Leanne tomorrow." All the color drained from Mark's face. He went from slightly pale to completely chalk white. I couldn't even tell if he sat down or just collapsed into his chair. Tracy turned back to me. "So, is that what you like about him?" she asked, tilting her head. "That he's a spineless little man who just does whatever he's told?" Just like that, Mark's color came rushing back, except now his face was burning red. He gripped the edge of the table, half standing, looking like he was ready to throw himself at Tracy. She just laughed. "Go ahead," she said, her tone amused. Lay even one finger on a 7-month pregnant woman and see how fast you end up in jail. Mark froze. And just like that, his anger vanished. He sank back into his chair, breathing hard, trying to pull himself together. Tracy, on the other hand, was completely calm. She glanced at me, then motioned toward a passing waiter. "Order me a glass of wine," she said. "This is gonna take a while." Then she turned to face me fully, crossing one leg over the other, folding her hands neatly in her lap. "All right, Mom," she said. "Let me explain a few things to you." She paused for a moment, then took a breath. "The reason my brothers haven't been on the last few family calls?" She shook her head. "It's because they believe Dad. They know you're a liar. They know you're a cheating woman." She stared at me, her expression unreadable. I don't know who cried harder that night. "When Dad got on Zoom and told us what you did, Jimmy and Johnny completely lost it," Tracy said, her voice sharp and steady. "They were sobbing by the end of the call. The only reason I wasn't crying too was because I was convinced there had to be some mistake. I refused to believe it." She shook her head. "The private investigator's report? That didn't convince me either. Dad wouldn't show us the pictures or videos, so I had no choice. I had to spend money I don't even have on plane tickets, a hotel, and everything else, just to come here and see it with my own eyes. Tracy, baby, I don't know what your father thinks he—" I barely got the words out before she snapped her hand up, like a cop stopping traffic. "You don't get it, do you?" she said, eyes blazing. "Dad has proof. Pictures. Videos. From inside your hotel room." She leaned forward, her voice filled with disgust. "He has proof my mother is a liar. He has proof my mother is a cheater. He has proof my mother is sleeping with another man." My whole body went numb. Still, somehow I forced out the words. "We'll figure this out as a family," I said, my voice a shaky mix of false confidence and desperation. "We'll get through this, together." Tracy scoffed, rolling her eyes so hard I thought she might fall over. Then, with a dramatic snap of her fingers above her head, she gestured to someone behind me. Our waiter appeared instantly. Tracy turned to him with a polite, almost apologetic smile. "Sorry for the confusion. I wasn't calling you," she said smoothly. That was a signal for the deputy. I felt my stomach drop. Behind the waiter, a tall, broad-shouldered man stepped forward. His presence was impossible to ignore. He loomed over Mark, looking down at him with an unreadable expression. "Are you Mr. Theodore Gleason?" he asked, his voice firm. Mark barely managed to clear his throat before answering. I am." The deputy didn't hesitate. "Mr. Gleason, you've been served." He dropped a thick yellow envelope onto the table with a dull thud. Then, his attention shifted to me. "And you," he said, "are you Mrs. Gillian Harrington?" Tears welled in my eyes. I could barely nod. "Mrs. Harrington," he continued, his voice unrelenting, "you've been served." An identical envelope landed in front of me. Tracy let out a cold, almost triumphant laugh, then turned to Mark. "You don't even need to open it," she said, nodding toward the envelope, "because I can tell you exactly what's inside." She smirked. "Leanne is—" Tracy leaned back in her chair, her voice dripping with satisfaction. "Leanne's done with you, Ted. She's divorcing your sorry ass." She let the words hang in the air for a moment before continuing. "And she's asking for everything. Full financial support to keep the house running until your youngest, little 3-year-old Piper, heads off to college. Private Catholic school tuition for all the kids. Child support. Spousal maintenance. The whole package." Tracy glanced around the upscale restaurant, taking in the soft candlelight and the quiet hum of conversations around us. Then, with a smirk, she turned back to Ted. "If I were you, I'd really enjoy every bite of tonight's dinner," she said, tilting her head. "Because I have a feeling you'll be living off ramen noodles for the next 20 years. Ted's face fell. His eyes glistened, and he dropped his head, defeated. But Tracy wasn't done. "Oh, Teddy baby," she cooed. "There's more." She leaned forward, lowering her voice like she was letting him in on a secret. "You see, my dad's a damn good lawyer. And aside from getting rid of this cheating mess over here, she gestured toward me with a little nod, his other priority is making your life as miserable as humanly possible. And, trust me, he's found a way to do just that. Ted barely looked up. He was already beaten, but Tracy wanted to twist the knife. Dad went through your prenup, the one protecting your 25% stake in your father's agency. Gotta give your lawyers credit, it's airtight. Ironclad. Leanne can't touch a penny of it. She paused for dramatic effect, then flashed Ted a wicked smile. But my dad can. Ted's head snapped up. You see, Tracy continued, her voice syrupy sweet, alienation of affection lawsuits don't fly in Ohio. But here, in good old North Carolina, they do. She let that sink in. And since you were dumb enough to have your little affair right here, my dad filed suit in Charlotte. He's expecting to win big. Maybe if you're lucky, he'll let you keep your job as the janitor. Ted looked like he might be sick. Then Tracy turned her attention back to me, her expression shifting into something almost playful. You, on the other hand, she said, won't be quite as broke as Loverboy over here. She crossed her arms. Dad's splitting everything down the middle with you, per the prenup. He keeps his interest in the law firm and the Vermont lake house he inherited from Grandpa and Grandma. You get to keep your 40% stake in Grandpa's insurance agency. Her eyes gleamed. Sounds fair, right? Then she delivered the final blow. But here's the fun part. Leanne is suing you, too. In North Carolina. For alienation of affection. She smiled, slow and sharp. And she's coming after you. Hard. Tracy's voice was calm, but the words cut deep. Leanne's not just suing you for the affair, she said. She's suing you for wrecking the lives of her 5 kids. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable. Good luck, she added. You're gonna need it. The tears that had started a few minutes ago only came harder with every word she spoke. My stomach was twisted so tight I thought I might be sick right there, ruining the pristine white tablecloth in front of me. How had my life unraveled this fast? Minutes ago, it was still intact, maybe not perfect, but manageable. Now, it was in shambles. A complete nightmare. Tracy reached for the glass of wine that had been sitting untouched for what felt like an eternity. Ted and I just sat there, watching in silence as she took a slow sip, then another, as if savoring the taste. When she finally set the half-empty glass back on the table, I noticed something I hadn't expected. Her own tears. They were heavy, rolling down her face just like mine. Then, she spoke again. I won't be coming home for the baby shower, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Cancel it. 12 words. That was all it took to send a fresh wave of shock crashing through me. It made everything that had happened in the last 15 minutes feel 10 times heavier. I just sat there, mouth open, unable to speak. And she wasn't finished. I don't want you coming to Atlanta after my daughter is born, she continued. I'll send pictures. I'll keep you updated. But until you get your life together, I don't want you involved with my family. Before I could even process what she was saying, Tracy pushed back her chair and stood up. That's when I noticed someone else stepping up beside her. Brian. My son-in-law. He wrapped an arm around Tracy's shaking body, holding her close as she sobbed. Then, in a voice so quiet I almost missed it, he asked, Did you tell her the last part? Tracy just shook her head. Tracy, he said gently, but firmly. I can't, she whispered. Brian turned to me, his expression serious, but not cruel. I might be wrong, he said carefully, but I don't think there's any way back to Chris. This affair. It's been going on too long. I swallowed hard, my breath shaky. But there is a way back to your sons, he continued. To Tracy. To your granddaughter. And to me. His eyes softened just a little. It's not gonna be easy. It's gonna take a lot of work. Then, after a long pause, he added, But we'll be here when you're ready. Brian leaned in close, his voice gentle as he spoke. Be the woman we need you to be. Then he bent down and pressed a soft kiss to my tear-streaked cheek before turning to guide Tracy, still sobbing, through the dining room. I watched them go, and the strangest thought hit me. Chris always loved watching old boxing highlights, and at that moment I felt like I had just taken a brutal uppercut to the jaw. like I was collapsing onto the canvas, completely knocked out in the middle of the ring. From Chris's perspective, I had no idea how I'd managed to keep my emotions in check over the last day and a half. Somehow, I had pushed through, even as my phone rang, dinged, and buzzed non-stop, until Tracy confronted me. After that, the notifications slowed to a trickle. Some messages were work-related. Others came from family, friends, and even Leanne Gleason, all offering their support. But the majority were from Jillian, and I deleted every single one without reading. I had mixed feelings about Tracy confronting Jillian and that idiot she was with. From the very start, when I broke the news to my kids about their mother's betrayal, her years-long affair, Tracy refused to believe it. She was sure there had to be some kind of mistake. Since I didn't want to expose them to the full private investigator's report and the recorded evidence that came with it, I had only sent them a 2-page summary. It was enough for my sons, but Tracy still had doubts. So, she and Brian hired their own investigator, a guy based in Charlotte. He got into Jillian and her lover's hotel room and gathered everything Tracy needed to see the truth for herself. Afterward, Brian called me. He told me Jillian had already phoned American Insurance, claiming she was sick and wouldn't be attending the last day of meetings. The Charlotte investigator confirmed it. Jillian had booked an earlier flight. She'd be home by 10 p.m. By the time Jillian was set to return the next evening, I had everything ready. Since we both legally owned the house, I couldn't just throw her out. But that didn't mean I had to make things easy for her. It only took me a few hours to pack up all of Jillian's stuff from our master bedroom and bathroom and move it into one of the guest rooms. I also hired a handyman to install double-bolt locks on both the master bedroom and my home office. It wasn't much, but according to my divorce attorney, it was all I could legally do for now. I'll admit, there was one extra thing I did. Completely childish? Yes. Disgusting? Absolutely. But compared to Jillian's little love fests every quarter, I figured it was fair game. I wanted to leave her with a lasting image of exactly how I felt. So, every morning since she left for Charlotte, I had been using the bathroom attached to the guest room, the one I moved her stuff into, and I never flushed. 5 straight days of man-sized dumps sat in that toilet, stacked above the waterline like some kind of grotesque monument to my rage. The door was shut, but the stench still spread through the entire second floor. The funniest part? It didn't bother me one bit. Just like with my farts, I was immune to my own stink. In fact, I had told Jillian 100 times, half joking, half not, that my waist smelled like petunias to me. Still, as much as I had mentally prepared for the showdown ahead, I tensed up the moment I heard the garage door opening. I was sitting in our fenced-off backyard, in the little retreat we had built years ago. There was a barbecue area, a dining space, and to the left, a large in-ground pool surrounded by a concrete deck. At first, I had tried to handle the landscaping myself, but after realizing I was completely out of my depth, I hired a professional. 7 years later, that backyard was a masterpiece. Lush greenery, blooming flowers, the kind of setup you'd see in better homes and gardens. Jillian and I used to love hosting outdoor parties in the spring, summer, and early fall. But as I sat there, listening to the sound of her car pulling in, I knew those days were over. Then I heard her voice calling out. I heard Jillian's footsteps inside the house before the sliding door opened, and then she stepped outside. The moment she saw me sitting at the outdoor dining table, she made a beeline for me. As she walked over, she asked, "Can I have a beer too?" "Of course," I replied, but unlike every other time she asked, I didn't get up to pour her a drink. I stayed seated. With a frustrated sigh, Jillian walked over to the outdoor fridge, grabbed a craft beer, and poured it into a chilled glass. She came back to the table and sat across from me, taking a sip. "I'm sorry," she said, looking me in the eye. I studied her face for a moment. She'd clearly just touched up her makeup, but I could still see the puffiness around her eyes. She'd been crying a lot. "What are you sorry for?" I asked. Jillian clenched her jaw, clearly annoyed, but she answered anyway. "I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'm devastated that I've messed up my relationship with our kids." "Liar," I snapped. Her nostrils flared, and she leaned into the table, hissing, "How dare you call me a liar?" I couldn't help but laugh, and the sound of it made her freeze. "How was your room service dinner last night?" I asked. That's lie number 1. How many more of your 10,000 lies do you want me to go over? We just stared at each other for a while, sipping our beers in silence. Eventually, she spoke again. I am sorry. More silence. Then I finally said, okay, you're sorry. After a few moments, I shrugged. I don't care. You don't care about our family? She asked, sounding confused. For Christ's sake, Jillian, I replied. Tracy's married and living in Atlanta, starting her own family. Jim's kicking off his career with a top engineering firm in Albany. John's about to graduate from Fordham University in June and already told us he's staying in New York City to work on Wall Street. We've done a great job raising them. Our kids are incredible people, but they don't need us the way they once did, I said, pausing for a moment. They've got their lives to live, but we still need to support them. Jillian almost screamed, and we will. We'll support them, each of us, as best as we can. I let out a deep breath and kept going. Unfortunately, we'll be doing it alone. She tried to cut me off, but I just kept talking. You've been a good mother, and I know you'll continue supporting the kids. But when it comes to being a loving and faithful wife, you fail. I don't like you. I don't trust you. I don't respect you. I'm going to fight this divorce. Jillian fired back, of course, you will. You'll fight because you're a selfish man, and you don't care about me. The silence stretched for a few minutes as we both sat there, lost in our own thoughts. Finally, Jillian asked, why did you involve the kids so early in this process? I needed them to give DNA samples, so I could make sure I'm their biological father, I replied. Her eyes nearly popped out of her head. You seriously think I would? She couldn't even finish her sentence. I know for a fact that you're a lying, cheating woman, I said. I just don't know when it started or how many men you've been with. Another shrug from me. And since I don't believe a word you say, I'll never get the answers to those questions. But what I do know, with 100% certainty, is that all 3 of those kids are mine. The paternity tests proved it. I couldn't help but laugh. Unexpectedly. I leaned across the table toward Jillian and said, in my most menacing voice, if I had found out any of our kids weren't mine, you'd be in the trunk of my car right now, and I'd be driving to Vermont to bury your body in the woods. There was a stunned silence. My words clearly shocked both of us, but it seemed to amuse the person who was just emerging from the pool. The soft splashes and a throaty laugh made Jillian turn around. What the hell are you doing here? Jillian snapped. Hi, Jill. Welcome home, Mickey said with a smile. Where's her body? That was Jillian's rhetorical question, directed at me. We both watched Mickey, me, with a sense of admiration, and Jillian, with growing anger. Jillian and Mickey had been best friends since their freshman year at the University of Connecticut. They roomed together starting their sophomore year, talked every day, and made it a point to meet up for coffee, drinks, or meals at least once a week. Mickey, a nurse by training, was now the director of nursing at the largest hospital in the area. She had divorced her serial cheating husband nearly 4 years ago, and Jillian and I had been there for her through it all. Both women were on the taller side, around 5 feet 10 inches, with gorgeous faces and bodies that could tempt anyone, even a priest. But they had some big differences. Jillian was more of the classic, curvy beauty, while Mickey was sleek and athletic. Mickey walked over to the fridge, grabbed a beer, and plopped down next to me, taking a few big gulps. You told him? Jillian shouted. Mickey took another long sip before answering. I hate to admit it, but it took me almost 2 days to decide to tell Chris, and another 2 days to set up a meeting with him. But I'm not ashamed to say I did the right thing. I told my friend about your betrayal. You traitor! We've been friends for over 30 years. Jillian yelled. Mickey sighed. Well, all good things come to an end. After a slight pause, she added, I doubt it'll matter, but Chris already knew you were an unfaithful wife. Jillian's gaze shifted back to me. Leanne Gleason told me, she muttered. Turns out that jerk gave her an. She was able to pull some strings, using family connections, and got the treatment without reporting it through official channels. She hired a private investigator and stopped having intimacy with him. It didn't take long for us to talk about her long-term affair, as well as a few other shorter-term ones with other married women. Jillian flinched as I kept talking. Leanne and I stayed in touch, And I hired a private investigator when you two went to that overnight industry conference in Washington, D.C. last month. That's where we got those disgusting pictures and videos for our divorce attorneys." I paused before adding, "I've been planning my escape since then." Jillian wanted to know, "When did you two start your relationship?" "Your husband's a pig," Mickey snapped. "Do you even know your husband?" "I've offered, oh God, have I offered. But he hasn't touched me, and he won't until after the divorce," I said. Mickey stood up, leaned across the table, and got as close as she could to Jillian before saying, "Once the divorce is final, I'm going to give him love every day, all day, until he gets sick of me. And I promise you, sister, he'll never get sick of me." Mickey turned to me, holding out her hand. "You promised me lunch." I took her hand, gave one last glance at Jillian, and was tempted to leave with one final cutting remark. But all I saw in her eyes was pain and defeat. It wasn't shocking when Jillian finally stuck to one promise and fought the divorce. The mandatory marriage counseling lasted 3 sessions. I showed up because it was required. When Dr. Cohen almost begged me, "Please, tell me just one redeeming quality of your marriage," I didn't hesitate to answer. "We made and raised great kids." There were smiles all around until "It's too bad she hated our kids so much that she ruined our family." That was what ended our sessions, and 8 months later, our marriage was officially over. I remember feeling down the night I got the decree. Around 8:15, there was a knock at the door. When I opened it, there was Mickey, standing on the front porch in a knee-length raincoat. She quickly looked around, checked that the neighbors weren't out walking their dogs, and then dropped the coat right there on the porch. Mickey and I became close over the next few months. The love was amazing, but something strange happened. I'd always seen her as a best friend while married to Jillian, but it felt like we'd lost something. Our close friendship had shifted into something else. After about 4 or 5 months, in a cheerful mood, Mickey called me. "Hey, lover, can you take a pretty woman out to dinner on Friday?" I laughed and replied, "Your wish is my command." There was a long pause, and I thought maybe the call had dropped, until Mickey finally spoke up. "I'm bringing my older sister. I want you to meet her." "Meet your sister?" "I've known Jan for decades," I said, surprised. Mickey sighed before admitting, "She's perfect for you, Chris." I heard a nearly inaudible SOB from her as she finished speaking. The silence between us lasted longer this time. Mickey kept crying, and I let out an occasional grunt, just to let her know the call wasn't over. "You can bring Jan if I can bring a client." "He's perfect for you," Mickey added. By the time our appetizers arrived at the table, I was deep in conversation with January. Mickey and Kevin were there too, but they didn't seem to notice us. Jan and I started meeting up 2 or 3 times a week, and we would double date with Mickey and Kevin once or twice a month. I quickly fell head over heels for Jan, and I could tell that she felt the same way by the loving looks she gave me. It became clear between Kevin and Mickey that they were in love, and things couldn't have gotten any better. Mickey went back to being my best friend, and 8 months later, she and Kevin got married in a traditional church ceremony. Jan and I followed just 6 weeks after, having a much more laid-back beach wedding. We were surrounded by our combined 6 kids, their families, and a small group of close friends. I didn't see Jillian for 3 years after that. We were reunited for my son Jim's wedding, and Jillian showed up with her husband, Michael. 2 years later, John got married, and Jillian attended that wedding too, this time with her husband, Claude. Then, tragically, Jillian's parents passed away together in a car accident. I later heard from Jillian's 4th husband, Anthony, that my eulogy had been a beautiful tribute to her parents. And that's the end of today's story. Did it go the way you thought it would, or did it take a twist you didn't expect? I'm curious to know what you think. Share your thoughts in the comments below and let's start a conversation. If this story kept you hooked, make sure to hit that like button. And if you're new here or haven't subscribed yet, now's the perfect time to join our community. I bring fresh, captivating stories every day, so click that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.